When I went off to college, I began making friends in my dorm. And one night, we were invited to a party at a frat house. There were drinks and beer pong, the usual fare. It was a good time, until the next morning when one of the guys there gave me a ride back to my dorm. I was hurt, but I couldn't remember anything. It settled in, and over the next few months, I imploded. I failed my classes, I learned to drink more, I dropped out of school, I never told anyone. And then I exploded. My parents didn't understand why I turned into a moody monster that suddenly had no aversion to high-risk situations. I became depressed, I took a lot of pills, and had to get my stomach pumped. Since I had just turned 18, they didn't call my parents. My secret was safe. No calls home at all. When I came home, tail tucked, things worsened from there. I still didn't tell them. I kept that secret for 30 years. Welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you?
I'm doing well, Ray. I hope you are too.
I am. This season here at Cold Red, we've been dedicating the entire season to a case that both Fitz and I had the opportunity to work when we were at the FBI. It was called the Center City Rapist Case. And we've had some very interesting guests on the show that have been directly involved in the case and even its aftermath. Today, Fitz and I would like to welcome back again retired Philadelphia homicide detective Chuck Boyle. Chuck, how are you?
Good. How are you guys? Good.
Good. And Sylvester Schieber, the father of Shannon Schieber, to further discuss the case. We also have some extraordinary guests with us today who agreed to come on Cold Red today and share their stories. Ladies, welcome to the show. Rather than me introduce you, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to our audience. Chris, why don't you start us out?
My name is Kristen Marshall. For the sake of this podcast, I am Chris, and I was unfortunately a victim of Troy Graves in Fort Collins, Colorado in 2001. I would have been number 3, so I was the one that they then realized they had a serial offender.
I'm Kristen Campbell, and I also was unfortunately one of the victims, now survivors, of Troy Graves. I was actually the 6th case in Fort Collins, and luckily scared him off, and he left a ball cap, which helped in a lot of all of this.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for being with us today and for your incredible courage in sharing your stories. We all know this isn't easy, and we truly appreciate your willingness to talk with us and our listeners. What we hope today is not just to recount the traumatic events that affected both of you, but to hear your voices and experiences, which are often lost in the broader narrative of a criminal case. Now, with that said, I want to let our listeners know that we had a third young woman that was scheduled to come on the show. Her name is Cassidy, and I spoke to her earlier tonight, and she felt that she couldn't come on and discuss this. But she did say to me, she said, Ray, she says, sometimes I speak better in writing something than I do in just talking about it. So she sent me over a document, the 3-page document, that I have not looked at and I have not read, and she asked me to read it to you here on the show and to our listeners. So without further ado, that's exactly what I'm going to do.
And just for the record, no one has seen this on this panel, this letter, so we're all going to be hearing it for the first time.
This is in Cassidy's own words. First, to be clear, I have a lot to say about all this, but talking about it has opened up something inside of me that forced me to reconcile other things in my past, such that I can no longer see them separately. There was a before there was an after. I wish I was in a place that I could show my face and scream it all, so it was best I write it down. When I learned about this podcast and that they were inviting me on to join the conversation, I didn't know what to think. I was driving, and suddenly, I could feel this ball of heat and fear rising up in my throat. I was caught off guard. My mind started racing, and strangely, my fight or flight instinct kicked in. I kind of panicked. I mean, we're rounding a corner on the 24th anniversary of that knife. Why was I so triggered? And then I remembered, that's the way it was and how it is now. It's just how I am now. In listening to the first couple of episodes, I thought this was a group of men trying to work out their guilt over actions taken and not taken within the well-guarded ecosystem of the Philadelphia Police Department, where power, ego, and above all else, self-preservation was what was protected and served. As I listened to the case recounted from the start to finish, I facilitated between anger, shame, simple guilt, survivor's guilt, rage, sadness, over all these things lost in the fire. Chuck, for what it's worth, I want you to know I forgive you. Not because I know you or that you directly asked or you had a direct or immediate hand in my inexperience, but because I appreciated that you found your voice to speak out in an attempt to right the past or at least make some sense of it. In my experience, I have met very few within law enforcement that see it as a job. It is a calling with what should be a code of honor, and I can tell that this has weighed on all of you for a long time. Rightfully so, but I hope you can find peace. I will say, I'm with Barbara Boyer on one note. It's not that hard. When policy, bureaucracy, or subversive cultures trump someone just doing the right thing, especially in a moment that was as critical as it was to Shannon, it's an absolute shame. I'm grateful that the Fort Collins police detectives and all outside resources who supported his capture came together to end him, including the collaboration with the Philadelphia Police Department. I was treated with kindness and compassion and will never forget how they made me feel. There is nothing that any of you can say that will bring Shannon back or erase the pain of living with what Troy Graves did to all of us. What it goes to show is how destructive pieces of shit like him really are, and how upside down our country value system must be that over 30 years on, we're still talking about the change we need. The episodes this season have focused heavily on the discovery of unknown facts between those who should have had them, but were instead illuminated by the father who made it his mission, really only the mission he has left, to ensure the truth of what really happened is told. Sil, Vicky, I know you carried both the torch and the cross for much needed change and the burden of the death of your beautiful daughter that never should have happened. You've covered the myriad flaws within the justice system for how sexual crimes against women are handled. Nationwide and countless untested rape kits, departments with insufficient resources, education, and training to generally investigate and bring justice to victims whose voices always seem to be the smallest ones in the room. We don't get to re-victimize or when rape goes to trial. This isn't my truth. It's just the facts. So that's the rage part. You told me, Ray, that your listenership is mostly women. I can see why. And if there are any law enforcement listening on a regular basis, my guess is they aren't the ones who need to hear the stories you share. But women do. We need to know that we're not alone. What a contradiction. How fucked up is that I find gratitude that I can take comfort in knowing that there are millions of us, our card-carrying members to the club that's free to join, but brutal in the monthly fees. It's a lemon of a deal. I hate that I don't need to look too far around me to find those kindred spirits who've got own chapters in this book. We often don't have to say anything, we just know. Our knowing also tells us to be hypervigilant. That danger is just a drink away. Excuse me. Protect yourself. Don't put yourself in a high-risk situation. Never walk home alone. Lock all your doors. Lock them again. Make sure your friends know where you are. Have an exit plan. Don't wear things that invite unwanted attention. Thank God I had a son. In my career in women's leadership groups, we talk so much about owning our stories. I had stood at the podium countless times to preach what women's power should look like. That we should stand full and tall, unapologetic. Don't play it small. But if I'm being honest, I haven't quite owned my whole story. And since this door is now open, here it is. I was 17. Up to this age, I grew up on a little hobby farm. I was in 4-H. I raised steers and sheep and hogs, and I showed them at the county fair. My mom told me to sew, decorate cakes. I was grand champion cake decorator. I won a scholarship in the Vent Science Knowledge Bowl. When I went off to college, I began making friends in my dorm. And one night, we were invited to a party at a frat house. There were drinks and beer pong, the usual fare. It was a good time, until the next morning when one of the guys there gave me a ride back to my dorm. I was hurt, but I couldn't remember anything. It settled in, and over the next few months, I imploded. I failed my classes. I learned to drink more. I dropped out of school. I never told anyone. And then I exploded. My parents didn't understand why I turned into a moody monster that suddenly had no aversion to high-risk situations. I became depressed. I took a lot of pills and had to get my stomach pumped. Since I had just turned 18, they didn't call my parents. My secret was safe. No calls home at all. When I came home, tail tucked, things worsened from there. I still didn't tell them. I kept that secret for 30 years. You all mentioned at the top 40 list of reasons why women don't report rape. I counted and checked the box on at least 18 of them. I was powerless against the vortex of an endless shame. My fear was my gatekeeper. I became an emotional cannibal. I was raped 5 years before Troy Graves. He happened just when I was going back to school to get my future back on track. It took me another 5 years after him to find my footing again. While both of my experiences with rape and assault were separate, I can no longer live that way and still heal. Because in the end, I am answerable to me. And while this is incredibly painful to remember, I learned so much along the way. Part of my healing is grieving. They both have many stages, and I've come in and out of it so many times. This podcast triggered me to come to terms with it and finally found the words to share it with my family. I've never felt so vulnerable in my whole life. And as hard as it was to say and hard for them to hear, I am grateful I did. I can actually stand in the truth I only talked about before. So Ray, Fitz, to you all, thank you. To all out there who have lived through rape, assault, here's my unsolicited advice. Never let them win. I went back to school. I did work and got the opportunity that could never have imagined would open the doors it has. I got therapy, loads of it. They got amazing roadmaps for healing. I picked up amazing friends along the way. The ride, die types, I will never give them up. And know this, energy can never be created nor destroyed. So spend it on the things that really matter to you. Fear will die if you don't feed it. In closing, Ray, Fitz, Chuck, Mr. Schieber, I am sorry I couldn't be on screen for this. What you are doing in exposing injustice, sharing women's stories with the compassion you do, brings power to voice. Thank you for letting me be part of it. And those are the words of Cassidy, who was a victim and now a survivor of Troy Graves.
Yeah, I'm moved beyond words. I mean, that was, you don't get much more from the heart than that. I'm not sure if some of these quotes she borrowed, which would have been fine, but fear will die if you don't feed it. Emotional cannibal. I mean, they struck a place that I've interviewed enough rape victims over the years and survivors across the table hours after it happened, and this is probably the first time it's been years later, and we have women coming forward like we have Kristen and Chris tonight, willing to share their stories. Cassidy, you're probably listening to this at some point. Thank you for those words, and thank you for enlightening our audience to what you've been through and that you are, in fact, a survivor.
The things that Cassidy said in her message, I thought were extremely powerful. And Jim's kind of talked that already. But what I want you guys to kind of do for us, if you can, is I would like you to set the scene for us in Fort Collins during the mid-90s. What was your life like then? And Chris, you want to start out, I guess, and then Kristen? I'm sorry, 2001. You're right.
In the mid-90s or 2001? Well, personally, for me, I had my son and my husband in February of 2001 after a 6-year battle with terminal cancer. My husband was told he only had a year to live. We were living in Loveland, which is a neighboring town of Fort Collins, and decided to move up to the area that we ended up living in Fort Collins. He was unable to work, and I was still working, and he was caring for our son, who was 4 at the time. And we were basically just trying to figure out how to live the last year of our life with him in it. We moved into our apartment, and we were only there a few months when Troy Graves entered our apartment in June of 2001. And I'm just going to say it was the one and only night that they weren't home and I was home alone. They were maybe 8 minutes away camping, and I went out to dinner with my dad, and we had an amazing meal together and lots of laughs, and he dropped me off at my apartment, and I was going to go out and meet some friends, but he said, "Chrissy, I have a bad feeling. I think you should just stay home and not go out tonight." And I listened, and I stayed home, and I was actually just enjoying having a little bit of quiet and having our home to myself for a little while. And I had been very much struggling with sleep. I was so stressed out with the diagnosis and how young my son was. And I tried to go to sleep, but I couldn't go to sleep. And I ended up just on the computer in our office to kill time, basically, until I was tired. And I finally felt like I could go to sleep. And I was walking out of my office, and I heard a sound around the corner. and it stopped me. And I don't know if any of you have. You probably have read the book, The Gift of Fear, that women are given these instincts for a reason, because when our fight or flight, as Cassidy talked about, kicks in, that's a gift for us to know something's wrong. And in my mind, I immediately brushed it off as it was probably the cat in the other room or something. But my instincts knew something was wrong. And I stepped out of that room towards my bedroom, and I was attacked from behind, pushed down to the floor. My immediate thought was, this has to be a joke. It was far easier for me to believe that this could be someone's sick joke than what was happening was actually happening. He moved me into the living room, and realizing that our sliding glass door, which was the size of an entire wall, was open, moved me back into the office. And when we talk about his plea deal, that was one of the things that he pled guilty to, was kidnapping in my case. There was a definitive moment in my mind that every rape victim has come up, and it's not even a half of a second. Am I going to fight, or am I going to let this happen? And I'm a fighter. I am definitely a fighter. I'm not someone who is going to let injustice happen to anyone, especially myself. But something told me that my son was already going to lose his father, and that I needed to do whatever I could to survive and walk away from it. And he felt it. He knew when I gave in, because he went from being very aggressive, threatening, to almost calm, almost like we were on a date. The time that he was in my apartment seemed like forever. And he even asked me, "Where's your family?" I begged him. I told him my husband was dying of cancer. I told him I had a little boy, and I told him, "Please don't do this to me." I was trying to get him to see me as a person and not an object or a victim. And he sort of, I don't think it worked, but I was hoping that it would work. I'm not going to get into all the details of the assault itself. I was left. He said, I was bound, laying on the bed. I believe he covered my head with actually one of my husband's t-shirts. I never saw him the whole time. He kept my face covered with towels and different things. And I laid there for a while because he told me, "I am going to leave, but not right away." And I heard him in the apartment, and all of my senses were just waiting for something to tell me that he was gone. I started getting very cold, and I thought maybe he left a door or a window open. I got up, and I immediately called 911. And then I called my husband. And I had to tell him to leave our son there with his friends and come home, because someone had broken and assaulted me. So I was victim number 3. And immediately police came. Immediately they were looking for prints, trying to figure out how he got in. And he had found the one window in my apartment that apparently the locking mechanism wasn't in the truck. And he could see that from the outside. I could not tell that from the inside. And that is how I came to be a part of this story. My husband would end up passing away April 11th of 2002, just a few weeks before Troy Graves was arrested. My agony for a really long time was that I was supposed to be loving and supporting my family through the last months of my son's life, and I didn't really get to do that. And then after he died, I had to figure out how to live my life and raise a son by myself. And how was I going to keep him safe if I couldn't keep myself safe? And it was a long process to do that.
It must have been incredibly difficult. Some people are dealing with one issue. You were dealing with numerous issues that you were looking at. You're not atypical of someone that's assaulted and has all these other things. Well, people have other things going in their life, but not like you had going on in yours. And I can understand how you would feel about raising your son and doing it in such a way that you're going to be able to protect him when you would feel protected, to try and protect your own self. But you have to understand that from my perspective, I don't think you failed in protecting yourself. I mean, there's nothing that you did in my eyes that would say that this is your fault. Saying that you didn't protect yourself is almost like you're blaming yourself. I don't think you should blame yourself. in any way. And I see you shaking your head, Chris, and I know you're not blaming yourself, but for our listeners there, I don't think anybody should ever blame themselves for what happens. You're not at fault here. It's the offender that is the person that did this, not you.
Well, and I think that, I spent a lot of years doing victims advocacy work after this happened. And I put myself out there in front of media. I put myself out there in front of DA's offices, police departments, criminal justice courses. And I think that my story, what's important about my story, and the biggest point that I would make in my story is that when I tell my story, of course, people feel sorry for me. They feel terrible. They feel sympathy, empathy. They feel everything. But I would stand up in these groups and I would say, all right, so now let's say I had been at the bar that night, that I had been drinking, that I had maybe had too many drinks, that I was wearing a tight top or a tight skirt or whatever. The typical, what was she wearing? How much did she have to drink? And I would say, if all those things were true, would you feel less sorry for me right now? And I think that when we talk about victims and non-reporting victims, that's what we're talking about. Because regardless of whether you're at home by yourself and someone broke into your home, you still look at what steps you probably took that got you to where you're at, because that's how society has always looked at this. Those are the questions that are asked. Well, what was she wearing? What was she doing? Did she have too much to drink? All those things. And it's disgusting to me that we don't feel just as sorry for the girl that had been at the bar and had too much to drink. And we may not believe her, but I never had to deal with whether people believed me or not. And I never had to worry about whether police believed me or not.
That's a whole other can of worms there, Chris. It really is. And we had one of the individuals that was assaulted in Philadelphia on last week. And that was a problem with that assault victim, that the police didn't believe her. And that's sad. But I can tell you this, in having worked with a few survivor groups and talked to them, lectured to them, it's almost always where the person that was victimized always self-reflects on what they've done that could have avoided them being in that situation. So there's almost as though they're trying to attach a blame. What did I do wrong? And the answer to that is you didn't do anything wrong. That's the answer to that. I mean, and you try and tell me, and it's easy for me to say that from on the outside looking in, but I don't think victims, when they're victimized, there's not as though, and they always say, well, there's victim participation. You were drinking. What were you wearing? That doesn't mean anything. No is no. There's no deviation from the definition or the word no and what it means. When someone says no, that's it.
Ray, we heard from Cassidy. We heard from Chris. We have Kristen here, and I'd like to, if it's okay with everyone, and of course you, Kristen, can you walk us through your fateful evening, and not fateful in a good way, of course, and just share with us and how it compares to what Cassidy and Chris has explained. The floor is yours.
Okay, so I guess it was August 1st of 2001. Cassidy and I moved to Fort Collins into our townhouse together to go to school and be roommates and all of that. We both were only about an hour and a half, 2 hours from home base. So school didn't start until maybe later that August, the week of the 23rd. And her and I were still wrapping things up in our hometown. So we weren't both home at night for the 3 weeks before Troy Graves broke into our townhouse. So I think he was probably thinking that maybe just one of us was there. But luckily, we were both home the night that he decided to break in. And he first came into my bedroom, and I was sleeping on my belly, and he jumped on my back and told me not to make a sound or he would kill me. And he blindfolded me and tied me up after taking all my clothes off. And I had been extremely careful because it was on the news, seeing that we were the sixth case, that there was a serial person within the community. And so I had a little part-time job I had lined up ahead of schedule, and I would even take the trash from the job in my car and take it home to throw away rather than go in the alley behind the place that I was working. I was really trying to be self-aware of knowing that this was going on. So unfortunately, that night of the 23rd, we broke in. And as soon, like Kristen said, you have that, like Chris said, you have that, are you going to fight or are you going to flight? And within seconds, I knew that this was the guy that was in the community. I just knew it. And so I basically used all of my senses that I had. I wasn't able to see him. It was 2 a.m. or whatever, sound asleep when he came in, and I couldn't hear him anymore. And I heard some shuffling around, so I could kind of sense that he wasn't in my room any longer. And so I said, I'm going to count down from 100 and I'm going to get the heck out of here. And so I probably got down to 97 and I got out of the ties and I got off my bed. I heard Cassidy make a yelp, so I knew that he had gone to her room. And I got out of the ties and I ran naked to the front door, and he came running behind me and screaming, and he went out the window that he had entered in. So I grabbed the phone and I went directly to our bathroom because we didn't have cell phones then. I grabbed our home phone and went to the bathroom and locked myself in there. And poor Cassidy asked if I would let her in, and I was just so shaken up from the experience that of course I let her in. And the police did not come right away. I think that they were really trying to, out where he was by that time, seeing that we were the sixth case. And so it might have been 30 minutes, it might have been 20. It felt like an hour and a half because we were just scared. And they finally showed up, and that was our experience.
And Cassidy was your roommate, and Ray read the letter from her earlier in this episode. That's obviously the same Cassidy.
Yes.
What an experience, you two. Have you stayed friends over these years since you were co-victimized, if you will, that same night?
Very close friends.
Okay.
Yes.
Sometimes it can work both ways. You experience something and each other can remind you of that, but otherwise you experience something and it brings a bond together. Chris?
Yeah, we all knew of each other. We didn't know who was who, especially after they caught him. We're told by the DA's office that they didn't want us communicating with each other because they didn't want him to be able to come up with the defense that, they knew each other and they made up these stories to sound the same. I will tell you, and I can say this on behalf of Cassidy also, because she and I have spoken about this fact that I'm gonna share. After he was sentenced, we were all allowed to meet all of the Fort Collins victims. I had been pushing. I was the oldest of all the victims. They were all in college. I was 26 with the mom. I had a career. I was really pushing for all of us to be able to know each other. I felt like we all needed each other to heal and get through this together. So after he was sentenced, the DA's office actually brought us all out a back entrance so that we could avoid the newspapers, and we all got to meet in one of their conference rooms. Kristen and I were in the elevator together, and we were standing next to each other in this freight elevator, and I didn't even know her name. I didn't know her. I'd never met her. I've never spoken to her. And I just grabbed her hand in the elevator, and we walked into that conference room together, and I don't know how long we held hands. And we were all able to meet each other, to know each other. Our families were able to know each other. Kristen's parents are like second parents to me. Still is like a second father to me. Carol and I are very, very close. A lot of us have kept in touch over the years. Not all, but a lot of us have. And I personally have a close bond with one of the victims in Philly also. We were able to meet Sil and Vicky, and for a few years, lived in the same area as them and we could have dinners, and Syl and I could sit on the couch and drink wine together and just care for each other and support each other through just the most awful thing that any of us had dealt with up to that point. And that's something that I don't know if any of us would have gotten through as well as we did for it not been for that.
Chuck's name was brought up by Cassidy when Ray read it, and you just brought up Syl's name, and Chris, you know each other. I want to hear from the other parties here also. May I ask you, though, we're at about the 45, 50-minute point. Would everyone here consider coming back for the next episode? We can follow up on this. Because I want to hear from Chuck and Syl, but Chris and Kristen, I almost need a little break here. I'm going to take everything in that you've said. So, everyone, Ray, any final words, and we're going to come right back?
No, that's fine. We come back next week or tomorrow, whenever it is. That'd be great.
Okay, everyone, before we go, a PSA from the RAIN folks. If you or someone you know has experienced sexual assault, you are not alone. RAIN, which is the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, has a national sexual assault hotline. They offer free, confidential, 24/7 support in English and in Espanol. Call 800-656-4673. Chat with them at hotline.rainn.org or text HOPE to 64673. Thank our guests for tonight, our producers, Matt Robinson, Matt McLaughlin, Rick Schilling, our music coordinator. And please like and subscribe, Cold Red. Check our website, coldredpodcast.com. And everybody, see you back next time with the same guest on Cold Red.